What's a novella-in-Flash and why should you try writing one? By the end of this video, we'll find out, and you might even get some ideas for writing one of your own. So a novella-in-Flash is essentially an extended work of very short fiction, which does sound like a contradiction in terms, I know. The flash part comes from flash fiction, which is essentially a really short story, usually under 1,000 words, quite often even shorter still. The novella part references the overall length of the finished work, and novellas in Flash tend to be shorter than normal novellas. Usually they end up less than 20,000 words. A novella in Flash is a linking of those two elements. Lots of very short stories that come together and combine to form one larger story. Often they have an overarching plot or a consistent set of characters or some kind of theme that's woven throughout all of the stories. If you already enjoy writing short fiction, you might be familiar with the feeling that an idea you have is just slightly too big for a short story, slightly too long, but also at the same time not long enough to be a novel. And if you tend to write novels, you'll also be familiar with having an idea that isn't big enough to fill a large project, but is definitely still worth writing. Both of those scenarios I think are perfect for a novella in Flash. They're long enough to allow you to tell a larger story, but they're also short enough that they won't take you years to write, and that's probably my favourite thing about them. I wrote the first draft of mine in about 30 days, which is easily possible to do. In fact, I might even have been a little bit slow. I've got a few more videos about flash fiction, which I'll link in the description below if you want to know a bit more about the individual pieces that make up a novella in Flash. But how do you write one? I wrote mine last year, and as with everything I write, it started with one small moment, which then expanded into a flash fiction story, and then that just grew into the novella in Flash. I'd say if you have any kind of story idea that you're excited about, you could probably turn it into a novella in Flash. You can pretty much start anywhere. For mine, the idea came from that one moment, a driver stopping to pick up a hitchhiker but forgetting about what he had in the glove box. I asked myself some questions from there. Where could I go next? How could this open out into a larger story? How could I take that small moment, that small scene, and make it into something wider? And once I figured that out, I was off. A key thing to bear in mind, I think, if you're planning to write a novella in Flash, is to approach it differently than you would a novel. You're going to be in each flash fiction or each scene very briefly, so it makes sense to think about what's most important in that scene that you want to carry through to the rest of the novella in Flash. For example, you don't have to stick to the perspective of just one or two characters for a novella in Flash. In fact, you can move between them quite freely from story to story. There can be as many characters as there are individual stories, because the overarching plot might be focused on something else. You definitely can use recurring characters if you want though. One thing I like to do is write a story from a certain character's perspective, and then just have them appear in another character's story later down the line. However, if the idea you have for your novella in Flash is centered around one central character, and you want to follow them for all 20 or however many stories you have, that's absolutely fine as well. A novella in Flash gives you a lot of freedom to go where the story takes you, and how you use characters is a good example of that. Don't feel restricted to sticking with the same characters, and also don't feel like you have to chop and change them all the time. Just listen to your story and follow that. It doesn't need to be even or neat and tidy, just take it wherever it needs to go. My novella in Flash moves through about 20 characters, but it keeps a common element throughout all of the stories. In terms of genre and subject, you can go pretty much wherever you want with a novella in Flash, I think. Though most of the examples I've seen tended towards the literary, I see no practical reason why you couldn't write one for sci-fi or any other genre. In terms of style though, that's where they differ from just chapters in a novel. Flash fiction in general, at least how I see it, is always about moments. When I write it, each story is one particular moment or scene in the story or in the life of a character, whereas a chapter in a book can be comprised of a lot of different scenes strung together. Because of that, flash fiction feels a little slower. You can pause a little longer and you can take a bit more care over your wording. You can make sure to pause on what you think makes each story significant. I like to think of a novel as walking forwards down a path, whereas I'd look at a novella in Flash as hopping from stepping stone to stepping stone. Whatever genre you write in, as long as you take each story or each flash fiction and make it its own significant moment, you should be fine. Another big difference from writing something like a novel is how you approach plot. And this is where I almost went wrong with mine. An overarching plot is definitely good to have with a novella in Flash. It takes all of those individual significant moments and ties them together, makes them more than just a collection of flash fiction. But I don't think you have to prioritise the plot in a Novella-in-Flash as much as you would when you're writing a novel. The mistake I made was almost doing exactly that. If we think about the pathway and the stepping stones again, every bit of the path forward in a novel, more or less, is clear and defined. You can see all the twists and turns, it's constant. But with the stepping stones, there are gaps, things we don't see. And since we're prioritising those significant moments from story to story, we don't really notice those gaps. And of course, that can apply to novels too. I'm exaggerating a little bit to make my point. But in terms of levels of detail and how much the author has to signpost their plot as they go along, in a Novella-in-Flash, you're a lot more free to leave things unsaid. Those gaps between the stepping stones are part of what makes a Novella-in-Flash such a unique form to write in. So don't feel the need to fill in those gaps. Every part of the story doesn't have to be defined and shown. Focus instead on what you think matters the most and organise that however you want. There really aren't any set rules for structure. It's really difficult to apply something like 3-act structure or any beat-by-beat method to a Novella-in-Flash, partly because the length alone would make it really tough, and also because they're just not designed to focus on the same things. There's no need for an inciting incident or a rising and falling action, all of that. One story in a Novella-in-Flash might not follow on from the last story. It might not even connect to it except for a tiny thread. In that way, it can be really easy to write one. You don't need to think about structure at all, just maybe plan an ending and find your way towards it, or if you don't know the ending, discover it as you go. If you're mainly a discovery writer like I am, you'll find a lot of freedom in writing one of these. However, if you enjoy or you work better with some kind of structure to refer to or to follow, then I can absolutely see how writing a Novella-in-Flash would be more of a challenge. In that case, what I'd suggest is making a few big decisions before you start writing, things that might help you quantify it. For example, how many stories that you might want to write to make up the entire thing. For me, that was 20, and they're all under 1,000 words long. Maybe figure out the broad arc of your story and make a soft rise and fall to follow along with. But remember that each story can be whatever it needs to be. Often when I was writing mine, I expected to continue from the last story or to pick up something I'd left behind, and I just didn't. Since they often don't seem to have any to speak of, structure isn't something that can hold a Novella-in-Flash together, but something that can is themes and motifs. For me, this was the most interesting and unique part of writing my Novella-in-Flash. With other forms of writing, the themes and the motifs can add some colour and some shading into the story. They can be the gilded edges of the pages. But with a Novella-in-Flash, that stuff sits a little higher in the pecking order. At least it does for me anyway. It's a much bigger part of the story. When I started mine, there was no structure, there was no plot. All there was a car. That same car appears or is referenced in every story. It's a character in and of itself, and it's the thread that holds the entire Novella-in-Flash together. Characters often changed, the locations definitely did, and even the type of story I was writing changed, but the car was a constant. It was the vehicle, pun intended, that I used to highlight what I wanted to highlight within the story. Without it, I don't think I'd have found that reason to move forward or known which direction to move forward in. So if you're not sure what your plot might be or what might tie all of your stories together, find a common element. Mine was an object, but yours could be anything you like. A phrase that's always spoken, a time of day, a location, a symbol, anything. And if you're not sure where to begin with writing a Novella-in-Flash or where to focus, then I'll give you some tips to help you get started. But before I do that, here's a few more details about my Novella-in-Flash. Right, what's the matter with you? I don't know, just really bored. Well, read something then. Like what? Flash fiction? No, too short. A novella then? Too long. How about an awkward mix of the two, which ultimately satisfies neither? Keep talking. Okay, so it's a literary crime story that traces the path of a stolen car through this criminal landscape of a rural town. Maybe. Yeah, you can check it out at kierenwestwood.com/books, or just go direct to Amazon. It's ebook and paperback. Yeah, alright. There you go, weird alter ego. Don't say I never do anything for you. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's already bought the book and left a review on Amazon or got in touch to let me know they enjoyed it. Thank you so much. So here's my tips to help you get started writing your own Novella-in-Flash. Number 1, begin with a small moment and really take your time over your first story. Number 2, write a few more and see if you can find a motif or a character or a thread that can be common to all stories. Number 3, if you're stuck for ideas, try writing from a more unique perspective. It doesn't even have to be from a person's perspective. Number 4, don't be afraid to make your Novella-in-Flash non-linear. Stories don't have to neatly follow each other. Number 5, be creative with time and space and scale. Writing a Novella-in-Flash was probably the most fun I've ever had with writing, so I would definitely recommend giving one a go. I'll put some examples and some information about Novellas in Flash in the description below. Thank you so much for watching as always, and happy writing.